Statistics
Wait,
say
I think
that
you said tasking and not taxing again.
taxing.
Taxing.
What is it? Taxing.
Hold on,
I
need
can't
some water.
fucking do it now.
Stop talking for just
Can
30
you just say the
seconds
line?
straight.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Tolerant Left. My name is Andy.
My name's Tate.
Tate is a good friend of mine. She is my guest today, and what we are going to do together is dissect the philosophy of neoclassical economics through Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom. Milton Friedman was born in 1912 and he died in 2006. He was part of the Chicago School of Economic Thought. And when we were talking about the Chicago School, what city are we talking about? Or is that just the philosophy is called the Chicago School? What's your guess?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't even know, like, where to get hints.
Because I thought it was somewhere in Australia, the Australian.
That's what I was thinking.
Or no, the Austrian.
I was thinking Austria.
Austria. That's right.
Could it possibly be Chicago?
Turns out it actually is Chicago.
Okay.
So in this case, it is not a trick question.
Milton Friedman went to
Yes.
school in Chicago.
He
The
actually
Chicago School
he
of
actually
Chicago.
went to the Chicago
The Chicago School of
So when we are talking about the Chicago School, yes, we are literally talking about the University of Chicago Press, the economists that were there. And we're also talking about the American wing of the Austrian School of Economic Thought. There is a difference between the two, but Austrian economics and Chicago economics, on a broad scale, they're both neoclassical. He lived through the Great Depression. The reason why that's important is because the Great Depression, for many people, actually confirmed John Maynard Keynes' theory that, it sounds like the name of the Tool singer.
I always think that.
I don't even know, am I saying that right now? Confirmed Keynes' theory that aggregate demand matters as much as supply. The reason why this is weird is because when we think about economic depressions, we think about them as in there's not enough to go around. There's not enough resources. So that would be a lack of what?
Resources.
Supply, yes.
Said no trick questions.
Right. So that'd be a lack of aggregate supply. But it turns out, according to Keynes, and he was right, as we saw at the Great Depression, which was some stock market fuckery, but also lack of aggregate demand also leads to depression, which is really weird because it proves that the modern economy is this like amorphous blob, almost separate from the desires and the wants and the needs of just normal people like us. Reason being, if you do not have enough aggregate demand in a society, then the economy crumbles. But it shouldn't be that way, because that's saying, hey, we have more than enough resources to go around, but we don't have enough people wanting this shit. How does that make sense? So imagine there's 1,000 Lamborghinis and not enough people want the Lamborghinis, then the economy crumbles because the Lamborghinis aren't getting sold. Hello, make the Lamborghinis cheaper, give one to me. What the fuck's going on?
Ring ring.
When you actually take the neoclassical idea of the ideal society and you take their equations and you bring it into the real world, you see that they believe in some pretty wacky stuff. Now, there are two streams of neoclassical economic thought. Saltwater, the Saltwater school from the coast, sympathetic to Keynes. The economists that were actually on the East Coast and the West Coast, they were sympathetic to Keynesian ideals, meaning they were all right with the government getting involved in the economy to some degree. Now, the freshwater economists from the Great Lakes area, hence freshwater, they were purists. They were neoclassical purists, meaning they believed that individuals are rational economic actors and therefore their economic models are accurate. So the easiest way to remember this, of course, is Saltwater is on the coast. So those economists are saltwater economists. Great Lakes is freshwater. So for instance, Friedman, he was in Chicago, so he was by the Great Lakes, so he was a freshwater economist. But
Why was this a thing though? Like, why?
it was,
It's just literally like just
yep.
like where they were.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally
It was another
just,
it was another
dictated
regional
they
difference.
Thought.
And because of those regional differences, there's ideological differences. For
Yeah.
instance, I'm not going to get into it too much right now, but the Austrians and the Chicagoans were in different areas, and they believed slightly different interpretations of neoclassical thought. Same thing here with the coastal economists and the freshwater economists in the middle of the U.S. They were in different areas. They had different... I don't know why the East and the West Coast got along all of a sudden, but they did. Being by an ocean made them have a different view of the economy.
Like just like the kind of water they were around dictated their
Well, exactly.
economic theory.
What my theory is that
choice.
seeing the vast nothingness of the ocean and all the sharks and the crazy waves, they said we need government protection. This is crazy.
The Great Lakes have waves, they just don't have sharks, so it must be like sea creatures.
Yeah.
I always say the octopus like are aliens, maybe.
Post-war Keynesian consensus. So when we're talking about the Keynesian consensus, we're mostly talking about the United Kingdom, but I personally believe there is some correlation to what was happening in the United States at the same time. Because as we see with Thatcherism and Reaganomics, there is some correlation between what the UK are doing and what the US is doing. And there's some correlation between the thought coming from the Chicago school and the kind of thought coming from the Austrian schools. So there is this correlation. But strictly speaking, it was based in the UK since 1945. Both the Labour Party and the Conservative parties of the UK supported Keynesian ideas such as nationalism, trade unions, regulation, high taxes, welfare, and the formation of the NHS. So when we're talking about nationalism, we're talking about the idea of the government actually taking care of its citizens versus the neoliberalism idea of this global free market and whatever happens, happens. Now, it's also interesting to see trade unions mentioned there. And that's because under a more Keynesian approach, you want to make sure there's a lot of money being circulated in the economy. So if your workers are paid more money, that's overall good. So they believe that government involvement is necessary to prevent downturns in the economy. However, in the 1970s, inflation and stagflation caused a distrust of this Keynesian consensus. So stagflation is basically when there's inflation and a stagnation of economic growth at the same time. And when this had happened, it kind of shook people up and said, all right, fuck the post-war Keynesian consensus. Maybe we need to have a different approach. So that's where Milton Friedman came into the mix. He wrote Capitalism and Freedom. He published it in 1962, so just a decade before the Keynesian consensus ended. So he was sort of an influencer in shifting economic thought away from government involvement and into free markets. And as time went on, his neoclassical approach became more relevant. What we have to realize, though, is that economic downturns happen all the time because of a myriad number of reasons. But it was very easy for the neoclassicalists to say, see, there is an economic downturn once the government started doing stuff. That means if the government stops doing stuff, then the economy will be back to great. Now, Friedman was a neoclassical economist, so he wanted as little taxes and government involvement as possible. And one way to cut this in the field of education would be to drastically cut education and therefore lower the taxes going towards public education. In order to make this argument without sounding ludicrous, Friedman has to do some mental gymnastics and deceptive language. So first, Friedman makes a distinction between schooling and education. He states that the activities of government are mostly limited to schooling, but really the proper concern is education. So this implies that the government concerns itself more with the regulatory and disciplinatory aspects of primary schooling rather than the actual teaching of knowledge, i.e. education. However, Friedman's solution to public education is simply private education. So what does this mean? What Friedman is saying is that schooling and education are actually two separate ideas that are not really mutually inclusive or mutually exclusive. Sometimes they overlap. So education is going to be for Friedman, this good thing where you get to learn and it's awesome. But schooling is going to be more of, oh, we're not as concerned so much with you learning, so much as locking you up in this classroom and making you do what we say. However, Friedman's solution is simply private education, which I don't know about you, but I don't know if I've even heard the term private education before. Have you heard it?
No, definitely not.
But I have heard the term private schooling. So Friedman's case is basically there's private education and then there's public schooling. There's either great, benevolent, private tutors that help these kids be the best they can be, and then there's these public teachers that just beat their kids and make sure they stay in line. And this hasn't really, this line of thinking has not been relevant for the past like half century, and even before then.
Capital punishment, we don't have that anymore.
We do not have that now. You can definitely not hit your kids, especially at a fucking public school. So it's definitely not relevant.
I don't know. I had a teacher slap me once.
Really?
Yeah, it was weird.
And that was a public teacher?
It was a weird school. What's
All
the
right.
next one?
Well, it kind of ruins the rest of this argument here.
Keep going. We can edit it out.
But there is no evidence to suggest that private schooling is any less disciplinary than public schooling. In fact, when I think about private schooling, I think about like this elitist, like rich person Catholic kind of vibe, and public schooling is a mix of all different races and people of different economic backgrounds. Because public schooling is going to be whoever is in that district. If that district is primarily white, yeah, that's how it's going to be. But if that district is multicultural, that's how it's going to be.
It's the general public.
Now, a private school is going to be whoever has access to the finances necessary to get, and whoever has the right vibe. So in a lot of ways, actually, private schooling is going to be way more disciplinary and exclusive than public schooling is going to be. Yet, for some reason, Friedman, he's not looking at the world and then deducing the ideal society from that. He has these economic models, and then he's trying to craft his world based on these economic models. So for him, if he thinks that taxation is theft, he's going to devise some Ponzi scheme where, oh, actually, private schools are great. But private schools are more likely to support enforced dress codes, religious indoctrination, and discrimination due to their status as an elite private institution, not a public one. Public schools are generally forced to accept all the children in their district. It's illegal for them to discriminate. Now, it's illegal for private schools to discriminate too, but there's plausible deniability. If a private school, hey, we just want all white Protestant men at this school, they can make sure that that happens by enforcing their own private rules and having their own sort of internal coded conduct that maybe law enforcement doesn't have to know about. So there is actually corruption that happens in private schools that absolutely cannot happen at a public school. With taxpayer money, you are so fucked if you do some elitist, racist shit like that. But these Catholic schools are getting away with this bullshit all the time. Private schools can choose not to accept anyone for whatever arbitrary reason they create. But the real reason they deny a potential student, it could be because of their class, race, sexuality, gender, etc. Private schools are not forced to accept all their applicants. They just accept whoever they want to. Public schools have to accept anyone. Friedman's goal is to limit the scope of government and reduce taxes as much as possible. One idea to accomplish this is to abolish public education, but have the government enforce a law that all parents must have their children meet a certain amount of schooling. So, this would be like you don't actually pay taxes and then go to school. Instead, the government just forces you to pay money to go to a private school. So, I don't know about you, but the government forcing you to pay money, what does that sound like?
Taxes?
It sounds kind of like taxes. So in Friedman's Utopia, you just still have taxes. They're just something that you pay to a private institution that fluctuates based on the demands of the free market. Does that sound fair?
Never heard of any system like that.
Yeah, so
before.
Friedman did not eliminate government control over education. His system still involves the government forcing children to enroll in schooling. He just got rid of public institutions that would actually carry out the schooling.
Mm-hmm.
So
who pays the teachers? It's like
yeah, it'd be all
taxes paying public funding. It's now the public funding.
Yeah, sounds
just
like the same.
Without the government as a middleman.
Yep, it's the same exact thing, and you actually would want the government as a middleman in some circumstances, because then they can regulate. They can say, hey, these are the rules that these schools have to follow. You cannot discriminate against people based on your sexuality.
What's the point of democracy if we make everything private?
Well, there really wouldn't be much of a point, but that is so. Economist Dr. Richard Wolff, on the other end of the spectrum, on more of the like neo-Marxist end of the spectrum, he said that we, as a liberalism, so Americans, Europeans, any other countries that are following this liberal idea, we've democratized our political systems, but we did not democratize our economic systems. That's why you're saying, well, what's the point in democracy if these private institutions can still do whatever they want? I don't know what the point is. You democratize the political system, but not the economic one, and it's not a full democracy. So Friedman did not even really, he just abolished the idea of taxes, but now there's enrollment fees and everything that you have to pay towards these schools. You're forced to by government force. So in doing so, he didn't even limit the scope of government. He did not limit the scope of government, and did not limit the expenses that one has to pay to access education. So he simply just replaced taxation with an obligation to pay for private education. So now, instead of your money going towards the government that could be reallocated to meet democratic needs, it's going to private corporations, basically. Private institutions that, as you said, are not bounded by any sort of democratic ideal like the public institutions are. So Friedman's idea of education and his proposed system actually seems much worse than our current one. Instead of members of the community paying a low tax so their kids can access the community school, they are forced by the government to purchase private schooling, and their children must meet some arbitrary level of education that may be much harder for some to reach than others.
Or do private institutions that people are forced to go to cater to like private needs of the individuals?
Yes. In fact, they could. Now, the reason why that's a little bit scary, though, is because they may make it so that just students of a lower socioeconomic class that don't have bargaining power, or students with learning disabilities, are just stuck trying to get these.
Or they're forced to go to very shitty schools.
That's definitely a part of it too. Yeah, you're going to have
money, you can go to a better school.
To a certain extent, that already is kind of how it is with the way that districts are set up, but there is still federal reallocation of taxes to make schools better that might not have enough local funding. But in this completely privatized system, yeah, it's going to be just whatever you can afford is what your kids can go to. So the rich kids are going to get the best education. Now, on top of that, there's not a K through 12 system necessarily. Friedman was proposing that it's going to be a certain amount of like credits that you need or testing that you need to do. Not really sure yet how we're going to decide when someone's able to graduate. But the state just needs to force this, okay, all the students need to meet this level. Now, my problem is, with these private institutions, couldn't someone just pay them off to say that, hey, my kid meet this level? I'll give you a generous donation and then just say my kid meets
with
this
no
level.
third-party oversight was to stop it.
Yeah. And so if this system was to have third-party oversight, it would be, all right, we have to bandage this system to such a point that we should have just had public education. Because if you need literal like government regulators on spot making sure that none of the shenanigans happens, we should have just had public schooling where those regulations are already built in. And we actually already see some of this happening today of the education bribery with what do they call it? An honorary degree. So this would most certainly. Bill Nye has an honorary degree. So this would most certainly happen in a completely privatized education system. Hey, I'll pay you off, and then now say that I graduated high school, or say that I have an honorary PhD. Because these private institutions, they're not just operating out of some sort of social contract or like allegiance to societal good. No, they're operating out of the profit motive. That's all neoclassical economists is that's all that neoclassical economists believe in, is the profit motive, these equations. Everyone's a rational actor. So I'm not going to do something nice for you. I'm not going to fix your flat tire unless you're going to pay me for it first. So no, I'm not going to be a good teacher unless I'm getting paid. But therefore, they must also admit that, hey, under your own philosophy, if someone comes to you and says, I'll pay you $10,000 to say that my 5-year-old is set, they can graduate high school now. Under their own philosophy, they say that those teachers would do it because it's in their economic best interest to do so. So I don't know about you, but this sounds like a pretty fucked up world that we would live in, where everyone's greedy and there's not even enough regulatory oversight to account for that. How does Friedman defend this mess of an argument? Well, he uses kind of weird terms. So he doesn't actually come out and say he wants to abolish public education, because that might scare some readers off. So instead, he says that he just thinks that his proposed plans would reduce the likelihood that governments will also administer schools. Right? So he's not doing what people on the left have done recently, where they say defund the police, and then they say, oh really, in some circumstances we mean just reallocate funds to community investments. This is like the opposite of that, right? This is whitewashing it. Like, hey, I'm not saying I want to abolish public education. I'm just saying that perhaps maybe these ideas will reduce the likelihood that governments will also administer schools. Another thing he does is he ends up using weird terms so that his language is differentiated from the language of public schooling. So he says special subsidiary provisions will be in place to help people of a different socioeconomic background. But now, in public schooling, we already have those subsidiary provisions in place. They're called reduced lunch and taxes. There's already a progressive tax system in place to make sure that people aren't disadvantaged. For Friedman to make his system seem like it's actually not that bad, he has to use a lot of the ideas from public schooling, but just rebrand them. Also, in order to defend Friedman's argument, he has to make the case for financial fairness. Now, he doesn't actually say financial fairness, but it's neoclassical economists. We all know what's going on. So under our current system with public education, everyone gets taxed regardless of if they actually go to school or not. But now under Friedman's system, you're not taxing everyone. It's just people that need to go to school, or people that have children that need to go to school, have to pay these taxes. So Friedman's actually saying that this is the most fair system, especially in regard to people that don't have kids that need to go to school, or people that don't want to go to school. Why should I have to pay for your kid to go to school? That's basically the neoclassical response to that, right? I don't know. Why should I have to give a fuck about your kid? My problem, though, with these neoclassical and anarcho-capitalist arguments that argue for financial fairness, my problem with that is that their argument should not be respected when they mention fairness. Because I don't know about you, but I've never heard an anarcho-capitalist or a neoclassicalist or neoliberal talking about what's fair.
Yeah.
It's always might makes
Talk about
right,
how it's
and
not fair. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
a lot of shit about Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, and haven't you've seen that, I'm sure, of a lot of times.
Yeah, they're living the American dream.
And really the math doesn't check out. I mean, there's no way that Jeff Bezos does works a billion times harder than you. So there's no way to argue for financial fairness from a neoclassicalist perspective. Their ideology relies on equations that reduce humans to purely rational economic actors. They are methodical economists, not ethicists. They defend billionaires like Musk and Bezos to the death. But taxing Musk, tasking Bezos... what the fuck? But taxing... It's a really hard thing to say. Taxing Musk... it sounds like a perfume. Tasking Musk. Tasking Musk and tasking Bezos and other billionaires could actually end world hunger. The statistics say that...
Wait, I think you said tasking and not taxing again.
Taxing. What is it? Taxing. But taxing...
No.
Taxing. But tasking... I don't know how to... Tax. But taxing, but taxing. No, I got it now. But taxing Musk and tasking Bezos. I can't fucking say it. It's like speech class. I said speech class. It's like speech class all over again.
I'm gonna pee myself.
Taxing. I can't fucking do it now.
Stop talking for just 30 seconds. Can you just say the line? Stop talking for 30 seconds straight. And you hand me the water, please. I can't breathe. It's making my throat dry and I have to pee. I'm crying.
Taxes, tasking. Taxing. It's no, but just hearing the word Musk once makes it so I can't pronounce the T-A-Z. What is it? A Z? X. Tax. Musk. Task. See, no. You did it too.
Musk.
Tax. Musk. Tax. They're methodical economists, not ethicists. They defend billionaires like Musk and Bezos to the death, even though oh my god, dude, it is so hard to say. Even though taxing them... what the fuck? Even though taxing them appropriately could greatly reduce world hunger and even poverty.
Keep going.
Have you heard the statistics of... They're not saying that it will literally end world hunger and poverty, but come on, it would increase economic mobility to the point that it eventually would.
Seriously.
We're not stupid here. We know what the fuck's going on. We tax every resident of a city to pay. We tax every resident. We tax every citizen. We tax every resident of a city to pay for roads, regardless of if they even own them. Dude, this whole thing is just... Dude, just saying Musk once just ruined my speach skills.
The rest of the video is just gonna make me cry.
It's just this one paragraph. We got it. No, let's just do it.
You can tell whenever you're gonna have to say tax soon.
Yeah.
And his nose coming up. And is this wrong every time?
Dude, so if I do it wrong, I'm just gonna power through because I can't do it. I can't do it right anymore anyways. We tax every resident of a city to pay for roads, regardless of if they even own a flippin' vehicle. The roads benefit the citizen even if they are not the one driving on them. You know why?
Why?
Other things go on roads that might benefit them, like...
hot dogs.
Hot dogs? Yes! I can't believe you actually said hot dogs. You don't even eat hot dogs. But yes, for the hot dog fans out there, your hot dogs come to you on roads for the most part, from trucks. So even if you're not the one driving, you get benefited from having roads. But likewise, can we say the same thing about education? So, let's say that you have not gone to high school.
I didn't really.
Okay,
So.
great. But there's a lot of people in your life that benefit you.
Yeah, totally.
Like a doctor probably has gone to high school, and they might be able to help you with whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point. Can't argue that.
So we need to think about a developed country as, yes, you have to pay money to the government. That's a fee. That is a sales fee.
May I say, we have to think of a developed country as a country that helps develop its people.
Oh my God, did you make that up yourself?
Just now, yeah.
That's sick. All right, we're going to end it there. Neoclassicalist debunked.
Is it Tusk or Task?
Leave a comment below. Help us figure it out.